Power creates a dangerous illusion, and Sheriff Cole Taggart was the ultimate believer. He spent years turning the highways of Georgia into his personal hunting ground, using his badge to terrorize and exploit those he deemed vulnerable. He thought his latest victim, a lone black woman in a luxury SUV, was just another easy mark to rob and ruin. He was wrong. She wasn't a civilian. She was the nightmare he had never prepared for. This is the story of how an arrogant predator accidentally walked into his own cage. Ridgeville County sat like a forgotten bruise on the edge of the state line, a stretch of pine-choked highway where the speed limit dropped from 65 to 35 with zero warning. For the locals, it was just home. For outsiders, especially those of a certain complexion, it was a trap. At the center of that trap was Sheriff Cole Taggart. Taggart was a man who belonged to a different century, a relic of a time when a badge was a license for absolute, unquestioned tyranny. He was a thick-necked, heavy-set man whose uniform always seemed one deep breath away from bursting at the seams. He wore mirrored aviators even when the sun was bleeding out into the horizon, and he chewed on unlit cigars that left his teeth permanently stained. Over his 15-year tenure, Ridgeville County had become notorious. Civil rights lawyers from Atlanta had tried to pin him down for years, citing egregious patterns of racial profiling and illegal civil asset forfeiture. Taggart had a habit of pulling over minority drivers in expensive cars, claiming he smelled marijuana, and confiscating their vehicles and cash under the guise of suspected drug trafficking. The victims, like Thomas Reed, a software engineer who lost a $10,000 cash deposit for a house, or the Miller family, who had their minivan seized on Thanksgiving, were usually too intimidated or too poor to fight the county in a drawn-out legal battle. And local officials, like District Attorney Robert Hughes and Judge Arthur Pendleton, were comfortably in Taggart's pocket, ensuring that any complaints were buried in a bureaucratic graveyard. But Taggart's arrogance had finally outpaced his local immunity. He just didn't know it yet. It was a sweltering Tuesday evening in late August. The heat off the asphalt shimmered like water, distorting the headlights of the sparse oncoming traffic. Taggart was parked in his usual spot, an unmarked gravel turnout hidden behind a billboard for a defunct motel. He was bored, drumming his thick fingers on the steering wheel of his Ford Explorer Interceptor, waiting for something to break the monotony. That was when the 2024 Cadillac Escalade rolled past. It was a beautiful machine. Midnight black, tinted windows, riding smooth and silent like a panther in the dusk. Taggart's eyes narrowed. He hit the accelerator, kicking up a cloud of white dust, and pulled out onto the highway, tailing the SUV at a predatory distance. Through the rear window, he could make out the silhouette of the driver. A woman. As the Escalade passed under the harsh amber glow of a rare street lamp, Taggart caught a glimpse of her in his headlights. A black woman, traveling alone, in a vehicle that retailed for over $100,000. Out-of-state plates. In Taggart's warped mind, the math was simple, and it always added up to the same conclusion: stolen or bought with dirty money. He didn't run the plates immediately. He didn't need to. He flipped the toggle on his center console, and his light bar erupted in a blinding strobe of red and blue, accompanied by a sharp, aggressive chirp of the siren. Inside the Escalade, Special Agent Ella Madeline let out a slow, measured breath. Ella was 36, a veteran of the FBI's Civil Rights Division, out of the Washington, D.C. field office, and a woman who had built a career on dismantling corrupt institutions piece by piece. She had been sent down to Georgia precisely because of the files sitting in her encrypted laptop on the passenger seat, files detailing the exact kind of traffic stop that was currently happening. She had been tasked with leading a covert preliminary probe into Taggart's department. She hadn't expected to become the bait on her second day in town. Ella glanced at the rearview mirror, watching the aggressive swerving of the cruiser behind her. She eased her foot off the gas, tapped her brakes to signal compliance, and smoothly pulled the heavy SUV onto the gravel shoulder. She put the vehicle in park, rolled down all 4 windows, a standard procedure she knew would make the officer feel safe, and placed both hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. She waited. In the side mirror, she watched Taggart step out of his cruiser. He didn't approach immediately. He unclipped the retaining strap on his holster, a deliberate and aggressive physical threat, resting his hand on the butt of his Glock. He walked with a heavy, swaggering gait, shining his high-powered maglite directly into her side mirror to blind her, despite the ambient light still lingering in the sky. "Turn the engine off. Drop the keys out the window," Taggart barked as he reached the rear quarter panel of the Escalade. Ella remained perfectly calm. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" "I said turn the engine off and drop the keys out the window," Taggart repeated, his voice rising, thick with a southern drawl that dripped with condescension. He stepped up to the driver's side window, leaning his head in slightly, his nose wrinkling as if he were trying to catch a scent. "Whose car is this, girl?" Ella's jaw tightened imperceptibly at the word, "girl." She reached forward slowly, turning the ignition off, but she did not take the keys out. It was a keyless ignition anyway. The fob was in her pocket. "The vehicle belongs to my employer, Deputy." She paused, looking at his collar. "Sheriff, your employer?" Taggart sneered. He shone the flashlight directly into her eyes, lingering unnecessarily long. "And who might that be? A cartel boss in Miami? Or maybe a chop shop out of Atlanta? Let me see your license and registration. Now." "I can assure you the vehicle is legally registered," Ella said, her voice steady, professional, and devoid of the fear Taggart was so used to inducing. She slowly reached into the center console. "Keep your hands where I can see 'em," Taggart snapped, his hand tightening on his weapon. "My registration is in the glove compartment, Sheriff," Ella stated evenly, locking eyes with him. "My driver's license is in my wallet, in my purse on the passenger seat. I am going to reach over, very slowly, to retrieve them." "Is that understood?" Taggart bristled. He wasn't used to people, especially black people, speaking to him with such unwavering authority. It infuriated him. "Just get the damn papers and don't make any sudden moves unless you want a bullet in your lap." Ella retrieved a standard civilian driver's license, a cover ID issued under her real name but scrubbed of federal ties, and the vehicle's registration. She handed them out the window. Taggart snatched them from her hand. He looked at the license, then at the registration. The registration listed a generic shell corporation, the bureau used for its fleet vehicles. Apex Logistics, LLC. "Apex Logistics," Taggart muttered, a smirk curling his lips. "Yeah, I've heard that one before. Sounds like a shell company to me. Why are you driving a $100,000 truck registered to a phantom company on my highway, Ella?" "I wasn't aware driving on a public highway was a crime, Sheriff Taggart," Ella replied. "Why exactly did you pull me over?" "You swerved over the yellow line," Taggart lied effortlessly. "Twice. And your windows are tinted too dark. Plus, I smell a strong odor of raw marijuana coming from the cabin of this vehicle." Ella almost smiled. There it is, she thought. The magic words. The constitutional bypass code that corrupt cops used to violate the Fourth Amendment. "There is no marijuana in this vehicle, Sheriff. I don't smoke, and this is a company car." "Step out of the vehicle," Taggart commanded, taking a step back and unholstering his weapon an inch. "We're going to have a little search." "Sheriff," Ella said, her voice dropping an octave, carrying a subtle warning that Taggart was entirely too oblivious to hear. "I highly advise you to go back to your cruiser and run those plates and that registration. Call the phone number listed on the back of that card. It will save both of us a tremendous amount of paperwork. Are you resisting, girl? Taggart's voice was a low growl now. He reached for his radio mic on his shoulder. Dispatch, this is Taggart. I got a non-compliant suspect on Route 9, mile marker 42. Roll Collins and Harrison my way. Copy that, Sheriff, the dispatcher's voice crackled. Units en route. I am not resisting, Ella said, keeping her hands firmly on the wheel. I am informing you that you are making a severe miscalculation. You have no probable cause for a search, and your claim of smelling marijuana is a fabricated pretext. Taggart laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You think you're a lawyer? Listen to me very closely. Out here, I am the law. I am the judge, and I am the jury until you get to the courthouse. Now step out of the damn car before I pull you out through the glass. Ella realized he was past the point of reason. He was operating purely on ego and prejudice. She had two choices. She could flash her badge right now and end this, or she could let him fully commit to his crime, cementing the civil rights case the DOJ was building against him. She chose the latter. All right, Ella said calmly. She unbuckled her seatbelt, the click loud in the tense silence. She opened the door and stepped out into the muggy Georgia air. Turn around, hands on the roof of the car, Taggart ordered. Ella complied. Taggart moved in roughly, kicking her legs apart wider than necessary. He patted her down with an aggressive lack of professionalism, his heavy hands searching for a weapon, but also asserting dominance. Finding nothing, he grabbed her wrists, wrenched them behind her back, and slapped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs onto her wrists, ratcheting them down tight enough to pinch the skin. You're making a mistake, Taggart, Ella said, staring at the glossy black paint of her vehicle. The only mistake made tonight was you driving a stolen truck through my county, Taggart sneered. He grabbed her by the bicep and shoved her toward his cruiser, pushing her against the hood. Stay right there. Taggart walked back to his vehicle and picked up his radio. Dispatch, run a 28/29 on a Virginia plate. Ocean Victor Niner, 22 Delta. A minute passed. The cicadas hummed in the dense pine woods bordering the highway. Ella stood patiently against the cruiser, the metal warm against her back, recording everything in her mental ledger. She knew exactly what dispatch was going to see on their screen. Sheriff, the dispatcher, Marge, came back on the radio, her voice suddenly laced with confusion and a hint of panic. Sheriff, that plate, it's throwing a code. It says, restricted, do not stop. Contact federal authorities immediately. Taggart frowned, leaning into his window. What are you talking about, Marge? What federal authorities? It doesn't say, Sheriff. It just has a 1-800 number and a red flag across the whole screen. It says the vehicle is restricted government property. Taggart looked up, glaring at Ella through his windshield. His mind, conditioned by years of absolute power and unchecked bias, refused to accept the obvious truth. Instead, it built a conspiracy. It's a clone, Taggart muttered into the radio. They're cloning federal plates to run drugs. I've heard about the cartels doing this out of Texas. Send a tow truck, Marge. We're impounding this vehicle, and tell Collins to step on it. Sheriff, are you sure? The system says, I don't care what the system says, Marge. Do your job. Taggart barked, slamming the radio down. He walked back to Ella, a triumphant smirk plastered on his face. You almost had me, sweetie. Federal plates? That's a federal charge. Cloning government tags to run dope. You're going away for a long, long time. You were told not to stop the vehicle, Ella said, her eyes boring into his. You were given a phone number. Why haven't you called it? Because I don't negotiate with cartel mules. Taggart spat. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the night. 2 Ridgeville County Sheriff's cruisers came tearing down the highway, pulling up sharply behind Taggart's Explorer. bathing the scene in a chaotic swirl of strobe lights. Deputy Jimmy Collins, a young, eager-to-please rookie with a buzz cut, and Deputy Wade Harrison, a hardened veteran with a permanent scowl, stepped out of their vehicles. "What do we got, boss?" Harrison asked, his hand resting lazily on his belt. He looked at Ella, cuffed against the hood, and smirked. "Looks like a big catch." "Cartel mule," Taggart said confidently. "Driving a cloned Fed truck. Claims there's no dope in there, but she reeks of it. Wade, pop the trunk. Jimmy, tear apart the cabin. If there are panels, rip 'em off. I want this truck gutted until we find the stash." "Wait," Ella spoke up, her voice slicing through the humid air with a sharp edge. "You do not have a warrant. You do not have probable cause. You have a dispatch alert explicitly telling you to contact federal authorities. If either of you deputies touch that vehicle, you are participating in an illegal search and a violation of federal law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law." Collins paused, his hand hovering over the door handle of the Escalade. He looked back at Taggart, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "Sheriff, did dispatch say something about feds?" "She's lying to get into your head, Jimmy," Taggart roared. "The plate is fake. Tear the damn car apart." "I am officially informing all three of you," Ella said, her voice rising to carry over the idling engines. "Anything you do from this second forward will be used against you in a federal indictment. Step away from the vehicle." Harrison laughed, shaking his head. "She's got a mouth on her, Cole." He walked up to the passenger door, yanked it open, and began rummaging through the interior. Collins, intimidated by Taggart, reluctantly followed suit, opening the rear doors and pulling at the leather seats. Ella watched them. The trap hadn't just caught the rat, it had caught the whole nest. For 10 minutes, the deputies practically dismantled the pristine interior of the Cadillac. They dumped Ella's overnight bag onto the asphalt, scattering her clothes. They ripped the lining out of the trunk. They tapped on the floorboards, searching for hidden compartments. "Nothing in the back, Sheriff," Collins called out, wiping sweat from his forehead. He looked visibly stressed. "No weed, no cash, nothing. Keep looking," Taggart demanded. He marched over to the front passenger side, shoving Harrison out of the way. "You idiots don't know how to search." Taggart grabbed Ella's black leather tote bag from the floorboard. He dumped the contents onto the passenger seat. Makeup, a wallet, a pair of sunglasses, and a heavy rectangular black leather wallet. Taggart grabbed the black wallet. It felt solid. He flipped it open. Time seemed to stop. The flashing police lights caught the golden glare of the heavy shield embedded in the leather. Above the shield, a stark, laminated identification card stared back at him. Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Ella Madeline, Special Agent. Clearance, Top Secret, /SCI. Taggart stood frozen. The crickets in the background seemed to suddenly go dead silent. The heavy, oppressive heat of the Georgia night suddenly felt freezing cold against his skin. He stared at the badge, his brain desperately trying to find a way to make it fake, to make it a cartel prop, to make it anything other than what it undeniably was. But he had been a cop for 20 years. He knew what a real bureau shield looked like. The holograms, the watermark, the raised lettering. It was authentic. He slowly looked up through the windshield. Ella was still standing by his cruiser, hands cuffed behind her back, watching him. She wasn't scared. She wasn't angry. She was looking at him the way a biologist looks at a specimen on a slide. "Hey, Cole," Harrison said, leaning in. "You find a stash?" Harrison looked down at the seat. He saw the badge. The color drained from the older deputy's face so fast he looked like he might pass out. "Oh, sweet Jesus," Harrison whispered. "What is it?" Collins asked, walking around to the front. He looked in the window. His eyes went wide. He stumbled backward, putting a hand on his head. "Sheriff, you said she was a mule." Taggart swallowed hard. His mouth was completely dry. He picked up the credentials with trembling hands, walking slowly back toward his cruiser. You're FBI?" Taggart stammered, his voice lacking all of the booming authority it had possessed 10 minutes ago. "Take the cuffs off, Cole," Ella said softly. Taggart fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped them on the asphalt. He cursed, picked them up, and hurriedly unlocked the cuffs. Ella brought her arms forward, rubbing her wrists calmly. She didn't rub them like a victim. She rubbed them like a fighter stretching before a bout. "Agent Madeline," Taggart started, forcing a nervous, desperate chuckle. "Look, there's been a massive misunderstanding here. Your plates came up weird, and with all the cartel activity—" "Shut your mouth, Taggart," Ella said. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut through him like a razor. She walked over to her vehicle, stepping over her scattered clothes, and picked up her badge from the seat. She clipped it to her belt. She then reached up to the visor of her Escalade and pulled down a small, discreet digital camera that had been silently recording the entire encounter. Taggart's eyes locked onto the camera, his stomach dropping into a bottomless abyss. "This is an FBI-issued dash cam, integrated with the vehicle's telemetry data," Ella explained smoothly, walking back toward the 3 stunned officers. "It has been recording high-definition audio and video since you pulled out behind me. It has recorded you lying about my driving. It has recorded you lying about the smell of marijuana. It has recorded you ignoring dispatch's explicit warning. And it has recorded you ordering the illegal search and destruction of a federal vehicle. Agent, please, we can talk about this," Harrison pleaded, taking a step back. "I was just following the sheriff's orders." "Save it for the grand jury, Deputy," Ella snapped. She turned her attention entirely to Taggart, stepping into his personal space, forcing the larger man to shrink back. "You thought I was just another black woman passing through your town, didn't you?" Ella said, her voice dripping with calculated venom. "Somebody you could shake down, somebody you could terrorize. You thought you'd take my car, drain my bank accounts through civil forfeiture, and throw me in one of your holding cells until I begged for a plea deal." Taggart was sweating profusely, the unlit cigar practically falling from his trembling lips. "No, ma'am, that ain't it at all. I was doing my job." "Your job," Ella interrupted, "was to protect and serve. Instead, you've turned this county into an ATM for your department, built on the broken lives of minorities. We've been watching you, Taggart. For 6 months. The Civil Rights Division doesn't usually deploy undercover units for a local sheriff. But you're special. We've traced the money. We've interviewed Thomas Reed. We've talked to the Miller family. We know about the slush fund Judge Pendleton helps you manage." At the mention of the judge and the victims, Taggart physically stumbled. He reached out to lean against his cruiser. He realized instantly that this wasn't just a bad traffic stop. This was a targeted operation. He was completely, unequivocally doomed. "You were the bait," Collins whispered, horror dawning on his young face. "No," Ella corrected, looking at the rookie. "I was the trap. He took the bait the moment he turned his lights on." Ella pulled her cell phone from her pocket and dialed a number. She put it on speaker. "Command, this is Vanguard," Ella said into the phone. "Go ahead, Vanguard," a crisp voice replied. "Subject has committed multiple felonies, including deprivation of rights under color of law, assault on a federal agent, and illegal search. He has fully activated the sting. Roll the tactical teams." "Copy that. ETA is 2 minutes." Taggart looked down the dark highway. In the distance, coming from the direction of the county line, a line of headlights appeared. Not police cruisers. Large, black, unmarked armored Suburbans. Dozens of them. They were moving fast, and they were coming for him. "Sheriff," Ella said, folding her arms across her chest as the distant roar of V8 engines grew louder. "I suggest you take your gun belt off and place it on the hood of your car. Your shift is officially over." The deafening roar of high-output engines drowned out the cicadas. A convoy of 8 armored, jet-black Chevrolet Suburbans crested the hill, their hidden strobe lights violently illuminating the pine trees in a chaotic symphony of red and blue. They moved with military precision, swarming the dirt turnout and effectively boxing in Taggart's Ford Explorer and the 2 local patrol cars. Before the heavy SUVs even came to a complete stop, doors flew open. Dozens of federal agents wearing dark tactical gear, Kevlar vests emblazoned with the stark yellow letters FBI, and carrying matte black assault rifles flooded the perimeter. "Federal agents, keep your hands visible. Step away from the vehicles." The commands were sharp, synchronized, and left absolutely no room for negotiation. Deputy Jimmy Collins immediately dropped to his knees, lacing his fingers behind his head and sobbing openly. The young deputy's career was over before it had barely begun, his blind obedience to a corrupt boss culminating in the worst possible scenario. Deputy Wade Harrison stood frozen, his face ashen, slowly raising his hands into the air as 3 red laser sights settled squarely on his chest. Sheriff Cole Taggart didn't move. He stood staring at his gun belt, which he had reluctantly placed on the hood of his cruiser just seconds before the convoy arrived. The reality of the situation was crashing down on him like a collapsing building, burying his ego under tons of inescapable federal authority. Special agent in charge. Owen Corcoran stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was a tall, silver-haired man with eyes like chipped ice, dressed in a sharp suit beneath a tactical windbreaker. He walked straight toward Ella, ignoring the local deputies. "Agent Madeline," Corcoran said, his voice calm amidst the chaos. "Status?" "Subject took the bait, sir," Ella replied, unspooling the audio and video feed cord from her dashcam. "Illegal detention, falsified probable cause, attempted illegal search and seizure. It's all on the drive." Corcoran nodded, turning his chilling gaze toward Taggart. "Sheriff Cole Taggart, you are under arrest for violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. You are also being charged under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." "Rico," Taggart choked out, his knees bucking slightly. "You're charging a county sheriff with a mob statute? When you run your department like a cartel, Sheriff, we treat you like one," Corcoran replied flatly. "Agent Madeline, would you do the honors?" Ella walked over to Taggart. For the second time that night, handcuffs were produced, but the dynamic had violently shifted. Taggart, a man who had spent 15 years using steel bracelets as instruments of terror and subjugation, flinched as Ella grabbed his wrists. She didn't yank him. She didn't kick his legs apart. She applied the cuffs with textbook precision, her absolute professionalism somehow hurting his pride more than any physical blow could. "You have the right to remain silent," Ella recited, looking directly into his terrified, bloodshot eyes. "I strongly suggest you finally start using it." As Taggart was shoved into the back of a federal Suburban, a synchronized operation was unfolding 20 miles away in the heart of Ridgeville. At exactly 9:45 p.m., a secondary FBI tactical team breached the front doors of the Ridgeville County Sheriff's Department. Night shift deputies were disarmed and ordered to the floor. Federal auditors and cybercrime specialists swarmed the administrative offices, seizing hard drives, pulling physical ledgers, and securing the department's evidence lockup. When they cut the locks on Taggart's personal seizure vault in the basement, the sheer scale of his criminal enterprise was laid bare. The vault wasn't just holding confiscated narcotics or illegal weapons. It was a graveyard of stolen civilian prosperity. There were envelopes stuffed with cash, thousands of dollars taken from minority drivers passing through on Interstate 95. There were expensive watches, laptops, and titles to over 40 vehicles that had been auctioned off through shell companies. Simultaneously, the FBI cast its net wider. District Attorney Robert Hughes was enjoying a ribeye steak at the exclusive Pine Valley Country Club when a squad of federal agents walked into the dining room. The room went dead silent, the clinking of silverware ceasing instantly as agents marched up to his table, read him his rights, and paraded him out in handcuffs past his stunned peers. Judge Arthur Pendleton, the architect of the legal shield that kept Taggart in power, was pulled from his bed in his gated community. Pendleton tried to invoke judicial immunity, screaming at the agents about jurisdiction, only to be shown a federal indictment signed by a United States District Judge in Atlanta. By midnight, the unholy trinity of Ridgeville County's corrupt justice system was sitting in separate, soundproof holding cells in the FBI's Atlanta field office. The predator had become the prey, and the trap had clamped shut with bone-crushing force. The interrogation room was deliberately cold, smelling faintly of bleach and stale coffee. Sheriff Cole Taggart sat at the stainless steel table, shivering in a paper jumpsuit. His mirrored aviators were gone. His tailored, intimidating uniform was in an evidence bag. Without his props, he looked exactly like what he was, an old, tired, frightened man. The heavy steel door clicked open. Special Agent Ella Madeline walked in, accompanied by SAC Owen Corcoran. They didn't slam files on the table. They didn't yell. They sat down methodically, opening a single, thin manila folder. Taggart looked up at Ella. The arrogance that had fueled his entire adult life had evaporated, replaced by a desperate, pathetic attempt at survival. "Agent Madeline? Ella?" Taggart started, his voice cracking. "Look, we're both in law enforcement. We know how things get out on the road. It's stressful. We make snap judgments. I made a mistake tonight. I'll admit that. Let me resign. I'll hand over the badge, I'll take my pension, and I'll disappear. You don't need to ruin my life over a blown traffic stop." Ella stared at him. The silence stretched for an agonizing 30 seconds. "A blown traffic stop," Ella finally repeated, her voice eerily calm. She opened the folder and slid a photograph across the table. It was a picture of Thomas Reed, the software engineer. Next to it, a photo of the Miller family. Then, dozens more photos of Black and Hispanic drivers, ordinary citizens whose lives Taggart had upended. "You didn't make a mistake, Cole," Ella said, tapping the photos. "You executed a business model, a highly profitable, racially motivated business model. Over the last 7 years, your department seized over $4 million in cash and property from out-of-state drivers. You claimed it was suspected drug money. Yet, in 92% of those cases, no criminal charges were ever filed." Taggart swallowed hard, refusing to look at the photos. "Civil asset forfeiture is perfectly legal under state law. It ain't a crime. It is when the money doesn't go to the department," Corcoran interjected, his deep voice filling the small room. He slid a financial ledger over the photos. "We followed the money, Sheriff. The cash you seized didn't buy new cruisers or bulletproof vests. It was funneled into a county improvement fund overseen by DA Robert Hughes. From there, it was quietly invested into commercial real estate developments owned by an LLC. Corcoran leaned in, his eyes locking onto Taggart. "An LLC secretly owned by you, Hughes, and Judge Pendleton. You weren't policing, Taggart. You were running a highway robbery ring." Taggart's breath hitched. He closed his eyes, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He had always believed he was too smart, too insulated to be caught. Pendleton had assured him the corporate layers were bulletproof. "Judge Pendleton will never flip on me," Taggart whispered, more to himself than to the agents. And Hughes knows we all go down if one talks." Ella let out a short, hollow laugh. It was a cold sound that made Taggart flinch. "You really don't understand how this works on the other side of the glass, do you?" Ella asked. She reached into the folder and pulled out 2 signed documents, sliding them toward him. "These are proffer agreements, signed 3 hours ago." Taggart stared at the signatures. They didn't belong to the judge or the DA. They belonged to Deputy Jimmy Collins and Deputy Wade Harrison. "Your boys sang like canaries, Cole," Ella said, watching the utter devastation wash over his face. "Collins broke down in the transport van, gave us everything. The quotas you set for minority drivers, the codes you used over the radio." Harrison held out a bit longer, but when we told him he was facing 20 years on the RICO charge, he handed us the keys to your basement vault and explained exactly how the cash drops were made to DA Hughes. Taggart slumped back in his chair. The betrayal stung, a sharp, physical pain in his chest. He had ruled them through fear, and the moment a bigger predator entered the room, that fear had turned them against him. They're lying to save their own skins," Taggart weakly protested. "It doesn't matter," Corcoran said, standing up, "because DA Hughes just threw you under the bus, too. He's claiming you extorted him. Judge Pendleton is currently claiming he had no idea where the capital for the real estate investments was coming from. In the span of 6 hours, your entire empire has collapsed, and every single one of your loyal friends has pointed the finger squarely at you." The absolute totality of his defeat finally registered. Taggart was entirely alone. "What do you want?" Taggart asked, his voice a defeated rasp. "What's the deal?" "There is no deal," Ella said. She stood up, adjusting her suit jacket. "We don't need your cooperation. We have the wiretaps, the financials, the dash cam footage, and the testimonies of your deputies. We are going to indict you on 34 federal counts. You are going to be stripped of your pension. Your assets, including your house and those commercial properties, are already frozen and will be liquidated to pay restitution to the families you robbed." Taggart began to shake. "My wife, Brenda, what about her?" "Brenda saw the writing on the wall," Corcoran noted dryly. "When our agent served the search warrant on your residence this morning, she was packing a U-Haul. She's filing for divorce, Cole. You have nothing." Ella walked to the door, placing her hand on the cold steel handle. She paused, looking back at the broken man shivering at the table. "For 15 years you abused the badge to make people feel powerless," Ella said, her voice dropping into a register of profound, terrifying candor. "You looked at people who looked like me, and you saw targets. You thought you were the law, but the law is out here, and it's about to put you in a very small, very dark box for the rest of your natural life." She opened the door. "Enjoy processing, inmate Taggart." The heavy door slammed shut, the echo ringing in the small room like a final gavel strike. Cole Taggart lowered his head into his hands, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing above him. The karma he had outrun for over a decade had finally caught him, and it showed no mercy. The predator was now locked in the cage, left with nothing but the devastating knowledge that he had dug his own grave, and a black woman from the FBI had simply handed him the shovel. The sun rose over Ridgeville County the next morning, but the oppressive, stagnant atmosphere that had choked the town for over a decade was entirely gone. By 7 a.m., the dusty highway where Sheriff Cole Taggart had operated his predatory empire was lined not with speed traps, but with satellite trucks. CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC had descended upon the sleepy Georgia County like a thunderstorm. The story had broken nationwide overnight. The headline was universally damning. Georgia sheriff arrested in FBI sting after profiling undercover federal agent. The Ridgeville County Sheriff's Department once an impenetrable fortress of local good old boy corruption, had been completely seized by the Department of Justice. Federal agents in windbreakers stood guard at the glass doors. The local deputies who hadn't been arrested were placed on indefinite administrative leave, their badges and sidearms confiscated. The entire county's law enforcement duties were temporarily handed over to the Georgia State Patrol under emergency federal oversight. For the victims of Taggart's regime, the news was a miraculous deliverance. For years they had been shouting into a void, their grievances buried by D.A. Robert Hughes and dismissed by Judge Arthur Pendleton. Now, the void was echoing back with the booming voice of absolute federal authority. Ella Madeline stood in the temporary command center, established in the town's community hall, sipping black coffee as she watched the tactical boards fill with evidence. Over the next 48 hours, the true, horrifying scope of the corruption was meticulously documented. D.A. Robert Hughes had attempted to negotiate a plea deal the moment he was placed in a holding cell, offering to wear a wire against the town council and the mayor. Federal prosecutor William Caldwell, a ruthless, by-the-book attorney flown in from Washington, flatly refused. Caldwell looked across the interrogation table at the sweating, terrified district attorney and delivered the crushing blow. "We don't need your cooperation, Robert. We already have your offshore accounts. You're going to federal prison, and I'm going to make sure you never practice law again." Hughes lost his law license before the weekend was over. His assets, including his sprawling estate on the golf course, were seized by the FBI under the very same asset forfeiture laws he had weaponized against innocent minorities. Judge Arthur Pendleton's downfall was even more spectacular. Pendleton had tried to leverage his political connections in Atlanta to squash the indictment, making frantic phone calls from his holding cell. He quickly discovered that no politician wanted to be within 100 miles of a judge caught on tape orchestrating a racially motivated racketeering ring. Pendleton was formally impeached by the state legislature in an emergency session, stripped of his judicial immunity, and slapped with a 20-count federal indictment for money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy. But criminal convictions were only half the battle. Ella knew that true justice meant making the victims whole. The DOJ publicly released the ledger found in Taggart's basement, detailing every vehicle, every dollar, and every piece of jewelry stolen over the last 7 years. To handle the unprecedented tidal wave of civil restitution, the federal government collaborated with heavy-hitting private advocates. The Equal Justice Initiative, founded by renowned real-life civil rights attorney Brian Stevenson, stepped in to represent the hundreds of victims pro bono. Stevenson's team of elite litigators descended on Ridgeville, filing massive, coordinated civil rights lawsuits against the county, the perpetrators' estates, and the shell companies they had used to hide the money. The karma was absolute and poetic. Taggart's commercial real estate investments, the properties he had bought with stolen money to secure his wealthy retirement, were liquidated at federal auction. The proceeds, down to the last cent, were cut into checks and mailed out to the people he had terrorized. Thomas Reed, the software engineer who had lost his $10,000 house deposit to Taggart's highway robbery, received a certified federal check for his original amount, plus an additional $150,000 in punitive damages. The Miller family, whose minivan had been seized on Thanksgiving, used their settlement to put both of their children through college debt-free. As the weeks turned into months, Ridgeville County was politically and financially gutted. The corrupt infrastructure was burned to the ground, salted and paved over. And at the center of the inferno was Cole Taggart, sitting in a 6x8 concrete cell, waiting for his day in court. 18 agonizing months had passed since the midnight raid on Highway 9. The slow, grinding wheels of the federal justice system had methodically crushed whatever remained of Cole Taggart's life, stripping away his assets, his accomplices, and his freedom piece by agonizing piece. Now, it was time for the final blow. The Richard B. Russell Federal Building in downtown Atlanta was a towering monolith of glass and concrete, a structure designed to make anyone who entered it feel small and insignificant. On this particular Thursday morning, courtroom 23B was packed beyond maximum capacity. The air inside the gallery was thick, not with the humid, oppressive heat of Ridgeville, but with a palpable, electric anticipation. The first 4 rows of heavy oak benches were reserved entirely for the victims, a sea of Black and Hispanic families who had traveled from all corners of the eastern seaboard to witness the final chapter of their collective nightmare. At the prosecution table sat Special Agent Ella Madeline, dressed in an immaculate, razor-sharp navy blue suit. Beside her sat Federal Prosecutor William Caldwell, organizing a stack of files that represented thousands of hours of meticulous investigative work. Ella did not look back at the gallery, but she could feel their presence. She could feel the collective breath holding in the room. A heavy side door opened, and the collective gasp from the gallery was audible. Cole Taggart was escorted into the courtroom by 2 heavily armed, stone-faced United States Marshals. The man who shuffled across the polished hardwood floor was entirely unrecognizable from the arrogant, thick-necked tyrant who had strutted down the highway in mirrored aviators. Taggart had lost over 60 pounds in the county lockup. His skin, once flushed with the ruddy arrogance of unchecked power, was now a sickly, translucent grey, sagging off his cheekbones like melted wax. His hair had thinned and turned completely stark white, but it was the chains that commanded the room's attention. Taggart was bound in full Federal Transit restraints, a heavy iron chain wrapped around his waist, connected to handcuffs, which were in turn connected to thick shackles around his ankles. Every agonizingly slow step he took echoed with the sharp, metallic clink, clink, clink of iron dragging across the floor. He wore a baggy, blindingly bright orange federal jumpsuit, the word inmate stenciled across the back in thick black letters, a devastating, permanent replacement for the starched sheriff's uniform he had once used as a shield. He did not look up. He kept his hollow, bloodshot eyes fixed firmly on the floorboards, his shoulders slumped in utter, absolute defeat. "All rise," the bailiff barked, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. Federal Judge Martha Gable emerged from her chambers. She was a formidable, no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for handing down merciless sentences in civil rights and public corruption cases. She took her seat at the elevated mahogany bench, adjusted her reading glasses, and looked down at the broken man sitting at the defense table. The room fell dead silent. Before the final sentencing was delivered, federal protocol allowed for victim impact statements. Prosecutor Caldwell stood and called the first name. Thomas Reed stepped up to the wooden podium. He adjusted his glasses, gripping the edges of the podium so tightly his knuckles turned white. For a long moment, he just stared at Taggart's bowed head. "For years you told yourself that people like me were less than you," Reed began, his voice trembling slightly before finding a bedrock of righteous anger. "You pulled me over on a dark road because of the color of my skin. You took the $10,000 I had saved for my first home. You stranded me on the side of the highway, and you laughed in my face when I asked for a receipt. You told me I was lucky you didn't plant a bag of meth in my trunk." Reed took a deep breath, his voice rising, carrying to the very back of the gallery. "You thought you took my dignity that night, Cole Taggart. You thought you broke me. But you only exposed your own profound cowardice. You are a weak, pathetic thief who needed a gun and a badge to feel like a man. Look at you now. The money is gone. Your power is gone. And you are exactly where you belong." Taggart flinched, closing his eyes tightly. A single pathetic tear cut through the deep grey wrinkles on his cheek, but he still refused to look up. Owen Miller stepped to the podium next. He was the father whose family minivan had been seized on Thanksgiving Day. "You left my wife and 2 young children crying on the shoulder of Interstate 95, Miller said, his voice thick with emotion. "My 7-year-old daughter asked me if the police were the bad guys. Because of you, I didn't know how to answer her. But today, looking at you in those chains, I can finally go home and tell her that the monsters do get caught." When the statements concluded, a heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the courtroom. Judge Gable leaned forward, folding her hands on the bench. "Cole Taggart, stand up," she commanded. The 2 marshals grabbed Taggart by the biceps, hauling him roughly to his feet. He swayed slightly, his chains rattling loudly in the quiet room. Law enforcement officers are entrusted with the heaviest, most sacred responsibility in our democratic society: the power to deprive a citizen of their liberty, Judge Gable began, her voice ringing out with unmistakable, chilling authority. "You took that sacred trust, Sheriff, and you twisted it into a weapon of blatant bigotry and insatiable greed. You did not operate as a peace officer. You operated as a cartel boss. You targeted minority drivers because you calculated, in your profound arrogance, that they lacked the resources, the education, or the voice to fight back against your authority." The judge paused, her eyes narrowing, piercing right through him. "You were wrong," Gable continued, her voice slicing through the air like a scalpel. "The United States Constitution is not a mere suggestion, and its protections do not magically evaporate the moment a driver crosses the Ridgeville County line. You weaponized the law, and now the law will answer in kind. For your role as the sole architect of this horrific criminal enterprise, for the systematic deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and for the sheer, unrepentant abuse of your office. It is the judgment of this court that you be remanded to the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons for a term of 300 months. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. 25 years. That sentence is to be served consecutively, without the possibility of early release or parole, Judge Gable stated, raising her voice over the rising murmur of the crowd. Furthermore, upon reviewing the egregious nature of your crimes and your background in law enforcement, I am formally recommending to the Bureau of Prisons that you serve this entire sentence at the United States Penitentiary in Atlanta, a maximum security facility. Taggart's head snapped up for the first time in 2 hours. Genuine, unadulterated terror flashed in his eyes, his jaw dropping open in a silent scream. A maximum security federal penitentiary for a disgraced, notoriously racist former cop was a living nightmare. He would spend the next 2 decades in highly restricted protective custody, locked in a 6x8 concrete box for 23 hours a day, surrounded by the very demographics of people he had spent his entire life abusing and incarcerating. "Court is adjourned," Judge Gable announced, striking her heavy wooden gavel. The sound cracked through the room, as final and definitive as a closing coffin lid. The gallery erupted. People wept openly, hugging each other, applauding and shouting prayers of thanks. The bailiff did not even attempt to quiet them. He simply stepped back and let the wave of long-overdue catharsis wash over the room. The marshals grabbed Taggart's shoulders, turning him forcefully toward the side door. As he shuffled away, his terrified, weeping eyes darted across the prosecution table and locked squarely onto Ella Madeline. Ella did not gloat. She did not smile. She did not offer him a triumphant sneer. She simply stood there, buttoning her suit jacket, and held his gaze. Her expression was a mask of pure, immovable, icy justice. It was the exact same look she had given him on that dark, dusty highway when he had violently slapped the cuffs onto her wrists. It was the look of a woman who had known exactly how the story was going to end from the very first page. Taggart's chest heaved in a ragged sob. He dropped his head, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably as the heavy wooden door closed behind him with a solid, echoing thud, sealing him away from the free world for the rest of his natural life. 2 hours later, the courthouse had emptied. Ella Madeline walked out through the heavy glass doors and stepped into the warm, golden Atlanta afternoon. The sky above the city was a brilliant, cloudless blue. She unlocked the doors to her brand-new, bureau-issued black SUV, tossing her heavy leather briefcase onto the passenger seat. She climbed behind the wheel, the smell of fresh leather a stark contrast to the stale, bleach-scented interrogation rooms she had practically lived in for the last year and a half. She started the engine, pulled out onto the busy interstate, and seamlessly merged into the fast-flowing traffic. As she drove past the large green highway signs pointing south toward Ridgeville, she didn't look in her rearview mirror. There was no need. The trap was empty, the predator was caged, and the roads were finally, truly safe. Karma had not just knocked on Cole Taggart's door, it had kicked it clean off its hinges, and it had worn a federal badge to do it. Power unchecked is power abused. But when arrogance blinds a predator, it's only a matter of time before they pull over the wrong person. Cole Taggart thought his badge made him an untouchable god in his small town. He built an empire on prejudice and intimidation, stealing from those he believed had no voice. But he forgot one crucial rule. True justice might be delayed, but it is never denied. When he handcuffed Special Agent Ella Madeline, he didn't just arrest a woman. He handcuffed himself to a federal wrecking ball that demolished his life, his wealth, and his freedom. Let this be a reminder that karma is real, and it often wears the face of the very people you underestimate. If this story of absolute justice, fierce karma, and a corrupt system getting completely dismantled got your blood pumping, hit that like button right now. We love bringing you these intense, real-life inspired stories of justice served cold. Don't forget to share this video with someone who loves a brilliant plot twist, and subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on so you never miss out on our next thrilling drop. Let us know in the comments below. What was the most satisfying moment of Sheriff Taggart's downfall for you? See you in the next one.